On Saturday, June 11th, I packed my bags and flew from Houston, Texas to Columbus, Ohio to compete at the 2022 US National Tournament. Here's how my first game went. Here is a board where I played as blue and placed 4th. White went first and went on the 6-4-10 or we cheat. Orange followed by going 8-10-4 pointing left, and red went on the 6-9-11 pointing left. Now put yourself in my shoes, where would you go here? I thought this was a very difficult decision to make. So not only am I curious to hear what your thoughts are, but I also want to walk you through my thought process and why I did a somewhat unorthodox setup. The first thing I really wanted to focus on here was the ports. Having a really strong port, in my opinion, really allows me to not have to focus on getting all 5 resources that game. Instead, I'll be really flexible with the resources I produce. The first thing I always look at is the 3-for-1s. These are my favorite ports. Right off the bat, you'll notice that there's a 3-for-1 on a desert and a 3-for-1 on a 12 sheep. These are extremely weak expansion spots. Now as a reminder, production can be measured by counting the dots underneath the numbers on the board. These are known as pips. So in my opinion, I thought it was quite a waste of time to try to get to one of these ports because you're not really increasing your production all that much. Every action I make needs to be impactful, primarily through adding production. So these don't seem like optimal options for me. Next, if we look at the 3-for-1 on the 6 ore, it'd be very difficult for me to try to attain this port. I'd likely not be placing on the 6-9, and even if I did, I wouldn't really have a great opportunity of being able to road settle faster than white here. In my mind, that 3-for-1 is more than likely white's first place he's going, and it'd be very risky for me to expect myself to have that instead. Lastly, moving on to the 3-for-1 port that's on the 5-4 sheep wood. Now you might notice that if you settle on the 9-5-10, you start with a wood and a brick. So ideally, you can turn this into a road to cut off orange to this 3-for-1 port. That'd be a very strong move. However, if you look at the rest of the board, you'll notice that there's 2 other spots on this board that orange can place where he would start with a wood and a brick. And since they go before me, they would beat me to the port. So if I'm picking the 9-10-5 here, there's a very slim chance that I could also get on the 3-for-1 port. This would mean that the only other option I have for getting a 3-for-1 port is to settle on the 5-4 directly. Now I personally, as 4th position, would hate placing on the coast as it opens up the board and allows other players to possibly have really strong expansion spots in the middle of the board. In other words, I hate all these 3-for-1 ports. So next we can look at the specialized 2-for-1 ports. First off, we can just look at the brick port. It looks like with red having strong wood brick and pointing left directly at the port, it's kind of locked down, they'd be the one having the port. I wouldn't like placing directly on the port here for the exact same reasons that I stated for the 5-4 3-for-1 port. There's too many free roads out there and I don't want to place on the coast. The brick port is not an option for me. Next we can move on to the sheep port. In order to easily attain the sheep port, I think I would have to place on the 5-8. Now this is actually a pretty strong production considering it's only 2 hexes. However, in my opinion, this also opens up the board quite a bit, just as if I was placing on the coast. But maybe the sheep port's really strong. If we look what I can pair it with, I can either pair it with the 8 sheep or the 5 sheep to really get the most out of it. Now the 8-5 with the 9-5-10, that's an okay setup, I could possibly make it work. Both expansion spots would be about 5 points of production, whether you place on the 5-12 or the sheep port. And in my opinion, after you make both those settles, your setup is only really on 4 numbers. You can only port one of those resources, and because you produce so much wood, it's going to be very difficult to manage it. In fact, the only way you really could manage it is by getting on that 3-for-1 port. And as I stated before, settling on a 12 sheep seems pretty wasteful of time. Overall, I think this port is pretty meh. Now let's look at the ore port. You can reach the ore port by settling either on the 9-11-2 and pointing right, or the 8-5-2 and pointing up. Both times having a 7-point production expansion spot is pretty good in my opinion. But let's see how well the port would go with this setup. Generally, I think you'd either be working with 2 or 4 points of ore only. And that's such little production, it's not a very meaningful impact when using the port. And we're talking about the resource ore here. That's probably one of the main resources you don't want to port away. The same really goes for the wheat port up here. Sure, we might be able to pair this with the 4-3-11, but that's only 5 points of wheat. Settlements, cities, and development cards all require wheat. So often, you're not going to want to port that away either. In summary, it is very difficult to pair these ports with high production of that specific resource until possibly a lot later in the game, which is not good for me. Lastly, let's look at the wood port here. I think there is a setup where you can pair the 4-3-11 with the 9-5-10. The probability of you actually obtaining this wood port is pretty high. And you'd also have all 5 resources, with the powerful 9 wood to your disposal. However, just as I said earlier with the sheep port, I think the expansions with the setup are slim and weak. Let's see, you have a 3-point production expansion onto the wood port, and then a 5-point production expansion onto the 512. Not very strong, not very impactful. Overall, I also think this port is just pretty meh. That was a lot of talking to basically say, I don't like any of these ports. And so if that's the case, in my experience, I like to get on the best ore and the best wheat on the board. This way I can up my production. Because I can't 3-for-1, I'll have to 4-for-1 all these resources. And the last thing I want to do is 7 out on 8 cards. If I'm 7ing out, I'm going all out. I'm 7ing out on 15 cards. Having all this production will also allow me more opportunities to trade my way into porting my resources by basically offering other players more cards. So now let's look at the hexes and find what are, in my opinion, the best wheat and the best ore spots on the board. Well, we're in pretty tough luck here because they're both in 2 hex positions, one with the desert, one on the coast. So we can't just settle on them. As I said before, the board will be just way too open for the rest of the players. But maybe we can justify starting with lower production with the idea of settling on these hexes. So does this mean that the 9-10-2 and the 5-10-3 are the correct picks? Probably not, but I did it anyway. This setup is only 17 points of starting production, which to the average player is pretty awful. And hopefully it's so bad that they don't even want to block this guy, right? Now after I place down my settlements, Red goes, well, at least you have all 5 resources. To which I say, well, I expect you will as well. And I think this is actually really important for me to say. I very desperately want Red to settle on the 10-3-11 here. And luckily he does. Now this does 3 things. 1, it forces Orange to take the 9-10-5. That way White can't settle there, have a great setup, but also start with a wood and a brick to immediately cut them off to the 3-for-1 port to start the game. The second thing it does is also forces White to take the 4-3-11. Otherwise Red gets this amazing expansion spot and it's uncontested. The third thing it does is it leaves the upper right hand of the board completely open for me. Because I have so low production, me settling on these other 3 hex spots is essential. So now that everyone's settled, we can take into account everyone's production. Orange leads with 22 points of production, Red has 18 points of production, White has 18 points of production, and I am at the bottom of the pack with 17 points. I am dead last, but not by much thanks to Red's placement. Now is starting placement production a vital statistic? Sure. But what I think is more impactful is measuring the production of each player after they get their first and second expansion spots. So let's look at those instead. After everyone does their first road settle expansion, the production points look like this. Orange is still leading the pack with 29 points of production. Red has 25 points of production. White has 23 points of production. And look at me at blue with 26 now. All of a sudden I am in second place. But let's even go one more step here. Let's go to the second expansion spot. Orange has 34 points of production. Red has 31 points of production. White has 26 points of production. And here I am at blue, leading the pack with 35 points of production. Now I have the most. I'm on every number except a 4, 11, and a 12. I have all 5 resources, double ore, double wheat, and space to connect for longest road. So then I'm a genius, right? Well, there are a couple of downsides to this setup. First off, we might be very slow due to the low production early on. While I, in theory, only need a 5 and a 10 to get to the first road settle, this also means I'm really screwed if those numbers do not show up. Usually a player can hedge this risk by trading, but with only 17 points of production, I'm just not going to have enough cards in my hand to really make an impactful trade this game early on. This means I could get stuck at my starting placements while the other players get to their expansion spots that we saw way before I do. Another point is that there is a glaring risk that another player could easily place on the 5-8 or the 6-9. So it is important for me to use my turn to quickly think, how can I negotiate my way out of this possibly happening? Now, let's say that Red takes the 9-5-10. Now, it is a serious possibility that Orange can make a play for the 6-9. In order to combat this, the first thing I would do is to try to explain that 8-11-2 is much better for them, and how I wouldn't even contest their 9-11 expansion spot for the entire game. And if that didn't work, maybe I turn to the other shoulder and threaten to trade Red my starting road in exchange for their cards so that they can cut off Orange to the 5-4. Hopefully it wouldn't even come to this. That's why it was very essential for red to not take the 9-10-5. Now let's say orange places on the 8-11-2. Now I could see white possibly wanting to place on the 5-8. If this is the case, then in my opinion, this is even more detrimental than someone placing on the 6-9. The first thing I would do is tell white, I am not contesting you for the 10-3-11 this game. It is not on my radar. I would not plow you there. Now they might not care about that because red is still a threat to take the spot. If they're not biting, then I would give white this alternative. You can place on the 6-3 brick port, and I'll trade you a wood for the wheat to start the game. That way, you'll be able to have an initial road to cut off red to get to your double wheat and ore spot. Now, as much as I don't want to hurt red's game here, my back is really against the wall. Now, in summary, I think there's 3 lessons to learn from this game. First off, without ports, try to get all 5 resources and the ability to city up quickly. This is in my opinion the best way to make do with not being able to port for specific things. Secondly, measure your production versus your opponents after 1 or 2 expansion spots, not just the starting placement. This is more indicative of the setup the player will be playing for the majority of the game. Lastly, use your turn to also think through ways to avoid someone spoiling your game plan. Know the risks of where you're placing and ideas of how you can avoid being extorted. Now, if you're looking to improve your skills at Catan, the best way to do so is by playing online through colonist.io. Colonist.io makes playing games with friends or competitors around the world simple, fast, and it's free. You can play ranked online matches and see your name on leaderboards, or you can play unique and crazy maps. I highly recommend you check it out. The link will be in the description below. Now let's see how the game played out. Fortunately, my game plan worked. So that is how I won my first prelim game. Now, would y'all place the same way that I did, or do you think there's a position out there that is a little bit better? Please leave a comment down below and I will reply with my thoughts. Thanks for watching.